This is Eric Kelly and Ralph Lee. They were convicted in 1993 for the murder of Tito Moreno. There was just one catch. Neither of them did it. But it took 24 years for DNA evidence left at the scene to be analyzed, proving them innocent. These two men had to spend over a quarter of their lives behind bars before the system did its job. This is Timothy Bridges. He was convicted in 1991 of rape and burglary and spent 25 years behind bars until he was exonerated when it was discovered the FBI relied on fake evidence when coming to their conclusions. This one hits a little closer to home. This is Johnny Williams. He was born and raised just a few miles from here in East Oakland. And this is him in 2000 when he was charged and convicted of rape. This is Johnny Williams 13 years later when DNA evidence that was inconclusive when first tested was finally retested, proving he couldn't have done it, and he was finally set free. In 2014 alone, 7 death row inmates were proven innocent. Since 1973, 166 people on death row, people that we as a society were okay with putting to death, were proven completely innocent. Samuel Gross, a law professor at the University of Michigan, estimates that 4.1% of all people convicted with a crime are innocent. That means that right now in the land of the free, we have 95,000 people behind bars for crimes they didn't commit. But there's an even more sombering statistic. Years of life lost. The total number of years of lives lost in the United States due to wrongful incarceration was 22,000. I say was because less than 5 minutes ago, during Justin's talk, I received a CNN alert that a man who had very little evidence proving his guilt was just put to death in Alabama. 22,060. There's a common linkage between most of these cases. The public defender system. According to the Sixth Amendment, when someone is charged with a crime, they are guaranteed the right to counsel. But the Constitution includes nothing about how good that counsel has to be. So in the 60s, every county had to be required to create public defender offices, offices full of lawyers to represent those who couldn't afford private counsel. Nowadays, that's 80% of all people charged with crimes. In Alameda County, it's 95%. But the system is fundamentally flawed. Since its inception, the public defender system has been underfunded and understaffed, so much so that 95,000 innocent people are behind bars. So much so that 22,060 years have been lost. From now to the birth of Christ and back 11 times. Nationwide, $5.3 billion are spent on public defenders. That seems like a lot, but it's only 2.5% of the total justice budget. To put that in comparison, the prosecutors who they're going against get 9% of that budget. Let's look at a few cases specifically. First, Washington. Washington actually has pretty good public defenders, but that's not saying very much. A lawsuit in Washington found that on average, public defenders have 45 minutes a case. Not only that, but they work far above their workloads. The average recommended workload for a public defender is 150 felonies and 400 misdemeanors. That's the max they're supposed to reach. But the average public defender nationwide has to take on 500 felonies and over 2,000 misdemeanors. 5 times the maximum caseload. How many of you can write a 3-page paper in 45 minutes? Now imagine if you had to look through boxes of forensics, boxes of witness statements, make direct examinations, cross-examinations, closing arguments, opening statements, interview your client, talk to others, talk to your family, fill out important paperwork in 45 minutes. It can't be done. How many of you have heard the statistic that 95% of people charged with crimes plead guilty? That's not necessarily because 95% of them are guilty, but if you have a public defender, you have a much better chance of survival if you plead guilty even when you're innocent and hope the system takes mercy on you, instead of going to trial and getting defeated. Now, 45 minutes seems bad, but it isn't the worst. A lawsuit in New Orleans found that on average, public defenders only have 7 minutes a case. Nobody can represent a client in 7 minutes. Most people charged with crimes only meet their public defender the day of their trial, if they even get one. Things all over Louisiana are just as bad. Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate in the world. 1.5% of all adults in Louisiana are behind bars right now. Their public defender system has been cut so badly in 1986, they had to effectively shut down for 6 months. And then they did the exact same thing in 2002. But let's talk about Missouri. Missouri has the 48th worst public defender system in the U.S. There, things work like clockwork. Every year, their House of Representatives passes a budget that gives public defenders increased spending. And every year, their governor, Jay Nixon, vetoes it. Their budget has been cut so badly, in 2014, they had to lay off 30 lawyers, even though their number of cases went up 12%. Things got so bad in Missouri that they had to rely on an old statute that allowed them to just assign cases to any lawyer in Missouri for free. They began assigning cases to Jay Nixon. But they also had to begin assigning cases to lawyers with no criminal experience. People's lives were on the line, and their one chance of hope, their representation, didn't have the experience to represent them. Now, I've talked a lot about public defenders. But a public defender being funded poorly wouldn't be that bad if prosecutors weren't funded so much. Remember when I said public defenders sometimes only have 45 or even 7 minutes a case? Prosecutors, on the other hand, get on average 8 to 10 hours. They get all the resources. They're able to hire expert witnesses. They're able to hire paralegals. They're able to hire the proper staff. And as a result, our justice system becomes skewed. The way things are set up, the way it's supposed to work, The prosecution is supposed to be always at a disadvantage to the defense. The way it's supposed to work is the prosecution is supposed to have to prove a defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. They have to prove there's no reasonable chance the defendant is innocent. But when prosecutors get 10 times the time, 3 times the funding, and so much more staff, the balance becomes skewed. It doesn't even matter anymore. I've talked a lot about what's happening. But let's talk about the repercussions. Do you notice anything about the 7 people that were exonerated off of death row in 2014? 6 out of the 7 are African American. In fact, this issue only affects the poor and minorities. Only 69% of white people have to rely on a public defender for their freedom. On the other hand, 73% of Latinos have to, and 77% of African Americans have to. This creates a cycle of poverty. What happens is an innocent person is charged with a crime, but because they have a public defender, they know they're not going to win. They plead guilty, and they get a felony charge. They go to prison, and if they're lucky enough to get out, they then can't get a job because of their felony conviction. Since they can't get a job, they're forced to commit crimes and remain poor. It's a cycle reinforced by the system. I've talked a lot about Washington and Louisiana, but we need to talk about home. We need to talk about Alameda County. Now, I'll give credit where credit is due. Alameda County has one of the best funded public defender systems in the world. But even then, that's not saying much. Even though public defenders have 90% as many cases as the district attorneys get $32 million more funding in Alameda County. Don't get me wrong, it's not necessarily bad for district attorneys to get more funding. They do have more cases, but the district attorney in Alameda County gets 60% more when they only handle 5% more cases. That's why situations like Johnny Williams arise. And again, credit where credit is due. Alameda County has taken steps to solve the issue. A few years ago, they opened what's called a conviction integrity unit. A conviction integrity unit is something that's been popping up in district attorneys' offices across the nation. It's their job to look at past convictions and determine whether that person was wrongfully convicted or not. The issue is, even though Alameda County has created this office, they haven't found a single problem with any of their own convictions. Again, things are relatively good in Alameda County. Down south in Santa Clara County, district attorneys get twice as much funding as public defenders. And over east in San Joaquin County, the district attorney gets 3 times as much as public defenders. This leaves us with one final question. Is it worth it? Now, we all want to be safe. We all want to be protected. We all want the bad guys to go to jail. But the issue is, in sending all the bad guys to jail, we end up throwing 95,000 good ones in there too. So is it worth it? I've talked a lot about public defenders and district attorneys, but at the end of the day, they don't determine their own budgets. Politicians do. I'd like you to raise your hand if you've ever heard the words tough on crime come from a politician. Now, that sounds real nice. We all want to be tough on crime, but the issue is, what they really mean is defunding public defender offices. What Jay Nixon uses every year as justification for slashing the public defender budget is that he's just being tough on crime. He's just protecting us. So is it worth it? That's a question all of us have to ask. If you decide, yes, it's worth it for 95,000 innocent people to go to prison just so I'm safe, then fine. I won't argue with you. I'll let you have that opinion. But if you say yes, if you say this isn't worth it, you can't claim ignorance after tonight. We have to make a change. And I hate to say this because all of us have come here with good intentions. To learn, to be inspired, to support loved ones, or to gain service hours. And I hate to say it, but it has to be said. Every single one of us in this room, even me, is complicit. We are all at fault on some level. Either we voted for tough on crime politicians, or we've done nothing. Neither can be an option after tonight. See, we are posed at a very interesting crossroads in Alameda County. We have a very interesting opportunity for us in this room tonight to have a very big impact on the public defender crisis in Alameda County. As I said before, the budget for these public defenders is determined by the Alameda County Board of Supervisors. It's a 5-member board, and their districts are all over the county. One of the biggest districts, the district that includes many of our mariners here tonight, that includes Fremont, Livermore, Pleasanton, and Dublin, well, their representative is retiring, which leaves an interesting spot. We just had a very important election this last Tuesday, and we have an even more important one coming up this November. I'm not talking about anything presidential. I'm talking about that seat. Last Tuesday, 4 candidates ran for that crucial seat. Every single one of them got an even share of the vote, around 25%. It really is anybody's race. It sounds cheesy, but every voice and every vote really, really matters right here, right now. And all of us are perfectly poised to do something about it. It is crucial for all of us, when leaving this room tonight, to spread the word to friends and family. How many of you have actually heard about this crisis before tonight? Not many. It's because many people assume it's a legal issue. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not equipped to handle it. But at its core, it's a budgetary issue. And all of us can handle that. We can all spread the word in one way or another, and we can all force one of those 4 candidates to help public defenders. And since the race is so even, if even one of those candidates pick public defenders and all of us agree to vote for them, they got the seat. We really can make a change right here, right now. If you don't want to do that, or you want to do something different, there are other ways of helping. You can support organizations like Gideon's Promise and the Innocence Project, which work to not only revoke wrongful convictions, but help public defenders. But most importantly, you can stand up, you can use your voice, and you can vote. Because it's scary. Any one of our neighbors, any one of our loved ones, any one of us might have to rely on a public defender someday. And if you do, you better hope you did something to help the issue. Because you don't want to end up like one of the 95,000 people. None of us do. So please, rise up. Thank you.